Hello, this is Di Jockson, and welcome to another episode of Stories in the Säfärsphere. Today I'm going to be breaking down the Deliquenthood storyline and all of the involved characters. Obviously a lot of my stories are quite dark, so there's a lot of death and a lot of destruction and the likes. And I've not really mentioned anything regarding that before. However, at the start of this one I am going to just quickly mention that there is going to be a content warning. This story was written during my edgy teenage years, and although I've done some work to upgrade it to my more common standards, and to bring it into part of the bigger lore, since I don't go back and retcon anything, I just add. I didn't want to retcon anything, so this story unfortunately does still exist. I'm not quite as enthusiastic about this story as the other ones, but it's still an important story all in all. So there will be a content warning at the start of this. There are underage characters. There is a child that gets murdered. There is references towards pedophilia, very briefly as well, and probably a handful of other things that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. If you want to skip this story, go right ahead. It's not a very important story, not massively important, but it is still canon, unfortunately. So we'll start off just by a quick introduction of each of the four characters, which will get more depth in some of the storylines, some of the chapters. Sorry, it's a short story. So we start with Corbin, and Corbin is the little leader of this group of four. Corbin is the main wolf, and he is 6'8", because main wolves are, quite tall. He's also the oldest of all of them, so it enforces that power dynamic. And you'll notice, with the exception of Charlotte, they all belong to the New Age Kingdom, and they all live on artifacts. They're all delinquents. That of course brings us to Kate, which is how that's pronounced. It's Kate. They're a fox, and they're 5'8". They're 18, so they're above age alongside Corbin. These two have a relationship with each other, and they she's like the half in command, but Corbin calls all the shots, really. Then we get Joe, who is a third dragon, and they're 6'1", also male, and they're 17, so almost there, but not quite. And then of course we get to the youngest of the group, which is Charlotte, who is a domestic black cat. They're 5'2", being the shortest of the group, and also the youngest at 16. Ugh. And they actually come from the United Species Alliance, but we'll see why they're on Optifax soon enough, which is where this whole story takes place, on the planet of Optifax in New Age Kingdom space. And they're very reluctant to be a delinquent. Oh, and of course their home planet is Pentila from the United Species Alliance. Sorry. So let's get into the actual story. We have On the Rise as our first chapter. Nice short stories. There's only 5 chapters. On the Rise is the first one. On the Rise follows the Corbin, Kate and Joe out on the field, shall we say, and Charlotte back at base, running technology, because it's far enough into the future where you can have that comms person, even in just a group of delinquent misfit criminals. So On the Rise follows them robbing a car dealership. Corbin just goes right over the wall. He gets caught immediately because he's not very good, actually, despite being the leader. And Kate comes right in, saves him, and they're storming the front. Meanwhile, Joe is coming through sort of a side entrance. He's got a bit more flair to his stuff, whereas Corbin and Kate are fairly they're doing it just for the sake of doing it. Joe has a bit more flair, shows off a bit, he makes his way to the server room of the building and destroys any camera evidence and the likes, as well as taking down anyone that's in the way, shall we say. And it all ends with Corbin, Kate, and Joe driving out of the dealership right through a window and making their way back to the little hideout where Charlotte's waiting. And that sort of... It's more of just an explosive intro. There's not a lot that happens necessarily, it's just an introduction to the characters. And it's then sort of, it's shown how far they've come and how they're sort of... they're now an established presence on Optifax. It's not the origin story of this, it's the story is less of the origin story of this delinquent gang, because they've been around for a little bit. Not like a long time, but a little bit. They've gotten a name for themselves. And it's more about the downfall of this gang. So that's where we reach... Oh, it's still Downtime Part 1. I wanted to have it, this one the calm and then the second one the storm, and I guess I never got around to that. That's an oopsie. So Downtime Part 1, a very interesting name, I'm sure. In between the 3 major chapters, we have a little downtime where we learn about the characters a bit. So during this time, we get to learn about the 2 lesser characters, I suppose, Joe and Charlotte. We get to learn their backstories. So Joe was doing really quite well for himself. He was passing all of his grades at school. Jesus Christ, this sucks. He was passing all of his grades at school, and he was making a name for himself, and he could have gotten quite a prestigious job in the New Age Kingdom, until eventually he decided that he'd played along for too long. He'd been good for too long, and he was bored of it. And he was like, you know what? I've heard about this new gang that's starting up, and they seem to be doing quite well. So I think I'm going to go join that. I'm going to go make a name for myself. I'm going to show up while they're doing one of their raids, and I'm going to join in. I'm going to help, and I'm going to prove myself right then and there. So he's like the newbie of the group. I don't know if that's messed with my recording now. Kathy popped up. He's the newbie of the group, which automatically means that Corbin just despises everything about him constantly, because Corbin's a bit of a wanker. But Joe doesn't really care, and because Joe's the new one of the group, and Charlotte joined pretty newly as well, just a bit before him, they get along quite well. Which is how we also learned Charlotte's story at this time. This is the trigger warning for the pedophilia again, right here, because Charlotte's story is that she was at school and she was, again, very smarter than Joe. Joe was just getting by with it out of natural skill, whereas Charlotte was properly studying. She was the classic nerd, shall we say. And she was asked to stay behind after class, which is when her teacher decided to start trying to make a move on her. We'll say that. Which eventually led to the point where she grabbed a ruler, like a plastic ruler, smacked it against the table to break it, and stabbed him in the neck so she could make an escape. Which actually ended up being a fatal wound and killed him. Therefore, she went entirely on the run and ended up in the New Age Kingdom after fleeing the United Species Alliance, and found herself sort of eventually part of this group, because obviously not only is she coming from another faction, but she's a fugitive, so she wasn't going to get a job anywhere. There was no chance to settle down, so eventually she had no choice but to join up with Corbin and Kate as their sort of intelligence manager. And that's sort of all we get from Downtime Part 1. We learn the backstories for these 2 main characters, and Corbin and Kate will be saved for Downtime Part 2. Now we go on to the Grand Heist, which is, of course, if it's 5 chapters long, this is the climax, isn't it? So the Grand Heist is them really pushing their boundaries. they want to rob just a full-size, like straight bank, like classic bank robbery. They want to go all in. They've, gotten their escape vehicle from on the rise, so now they want to go all in on this bank robbery. They want to really, really make a name for themselves in history forever, and they go for it. And admittedly, they're doing quite well. They're doing really quite well for themselves. They're managing to hold off authorities with hostages. They are managing to get into the actual vaults. They are managing to stop bagging the money. And then like, a 6-year-old kid tries to make a run for it. And Corbin, without absolutely any hesitation, shoots the child. Right in the back of the head. And kills them. This is what I was saying about Corbin. Just being like, he's not good, he's not skilled, he's just an absolute loose cannon. And so Corbin just kills that child immediately. And, they're all criminals, but child murder is where it passes the line for every single person there, except Corbin, apparently. And at that point, they take what they've got and they leave, and they're like, we're done. We're not doing this anymore. We're not serving under you, Corbin. We're bloody sick of this. Of course, they all still go to the hideout together, because where else are they going to go? They need to think about this. But as a general idea, they're like, you've gone too far. This is ridiculous. How could you ever expect us to follow you after you just killed a child? So I think that's the end of the content warnings. Only halfway through. Downtime Part 2, which is pretty immediately after the grand heist, and this is where we learn Corbin and Kate's backstory. So Corbin and Kate's backstory is very interlinked. They went to the same school together. They ended up having a relationship, falling in love with each other, and at some point, Corbin's always been a very hot-headed guy, even from a young age. There's clearly something very, very wrong with him. Which, I'm sure I don't need to tell you after what just happened, but there's something very, very wrong with him. And it's always been very, very wrong with him. And he's very hot-headed. And so, when somebody was antagonising Kate, when he was around 14, he ended up killing them. Once again, he just doesn't think first. Clearly, he's a loose cannon. He just does stuff. God, it's just a horrific character. This story sucks. But at 14, he kills someone and gets arrested. And obviously, because these two characters are so interlinked, they're sort of both one flashback. I'm not covering one of these characters specifically. So, Corbin and Kate are getting along. Someone antagonises Kate a bit too much. Corbin kills them and gets arrested. And Kate never really gets over Corbin and waits for him the whole 4 or 5 years that he's imprisoned, until eventually he's let out at 19, which is conveniently what he is now, which is why the gang hasn't been going around since, a year or anything. They've just sort of been getting started up and everything. And Corbin and Kate, with Kate never really getting over Corbin, and Corbin's issues being so deeply psychological, neither of them are better. If anything, with their age, they're just worse now. And that's when the gang starts up. That's when they eventually accept Charlotte in to make the trifecta. And that's also eventually when Joe hears about them and joins up. So yeah, these two in a relationship, and they're both absolutely deranged. But Corbin's just a bit more deranged than Kate. Kate's salvageable, shall we say. Anyway, one last job, the final chapter, thank God. One last job is where things actually become important to the lore, and to the overarching story of the Säfärsphere. It's the only reason this story gets to stay canonic. Is Corbin, like some just sociopath look, I don't know what it is. He manages to convince everyone, let's do one last job and then I'm out your hair forever. This is going to be the good job. There's nothing that can go wrong. This is going to be great, guys. And everyone's like, right, whatever. Yeah, we'll do it, and then you go away and we never have to see you again. So, Optifax is a planet that is called an omni-planet by the New Age Kingdom, which basically means it's one part living civilization, one part scientific research, and one part military. So it's a really good planet, so they've just put everything on there basically. Which means that these guys have access to a militaristic scientary base. Scientary is not a word, but you understand what I was just trying to say there, I'm sure. So Corbin decides, let's do that. Let's raid that. That's going to have some good stuff in there. And to be fair, he's right, but also that is a ridiculously high overtaking. Perhaps the first sign that things were going to be wrong was when Corbin demanded that Charlotte comes along in person as well. Which, of course, she's never done. Charlotte's, eyes in the sky, on the comms, hacking, whatever. Charlotte doesn't come on the field. So that's where people maybe should have realised something was up. But whatever, they go through with it. And they end up in the facility, going deeper and deeper. A lot less fighting, a lot more sneaking. Of course, they can't really fight these well-armed guards that are part of the top secret base of the New Age Kingdom, so it's a lot more sneaking. Till eventually they reach this significant science room where the main experiment is being held, where they can obviously steal their highest grade loot. And then Corbin basically willingly puts the entire facility into lockdown, which locks him, Joe, and Charlotte into that room, and locks Kate out of it. And then Corbin basically confesses the fact that he absolutely just hates, as if it wasn't obvious, but he confesses just how much he really hates Joe, and just how much, and blames Joe for everything that's gone wrong, even though it was clearly Corbin. Joe is blamed for everything that's gone wrong in Corbin's eyes, because he's the new guy, and Corbin begins fighting Joe, and they begin having, a back and forth, until eventually, with, Corbin's deranged mentality, he does eventually win. He's got that crackhead strength. So Corbin is choking out Joe, and Joe is going to die. He can't get free, which is where Charlotte's, memory of her past kind of kicks in suddenly. And with it being a scientific room, once again there's a ruler on hand, nice and convenient. Smack, shattered, and stabbed into Corbin's neck. Now, of course, Corbin doesn't die from that. It is a ruler. It's a miracle that Charlotte killed anyone to begin with the first time, but it stuns Corbin enough for Joe to wrap around Corbin's waist and pile drive them into a window. Although it's less of a window, it's more of a containment, containment room that's blocked off by a window. So Corbin is pile drived into that by Joe. The window smashes basically right away, and both of them go falling down in this containment room, which is filled with wire. Remember wire from a handful of the other episodes, mainly episode 2. Wire is the big bad that finishes everything off eventually. So they don't live. They die. That's the end of it. They die in that, but it's, sort of Corbin getting his just due and Joe making the sacrifice for everyone. With Kate not being locked in that room, Kate gets to go free. Kate makes a run for it and manages to get out of there. Charlotte was locked in with in the lockdown, so although she doesn't die, she is eventually caught and not only tried for the breaking in of that building, but also tried for the murder of the teacher, and probably gets locked up for the rest of her life, let's be honest. So, I know what you're thinking. Digoxin, why have you kept this story in? It's not good. and it is, quite frankly, grim and edgy for no reason. Well, the story's kept in because of these three things that are all significant to the story, and unfortunately demand that Deliquenthood remains a story. This is one of the 3 Wire events. So there's 3 events that lead to Wire being such a big problem. One is the JB project. One is this, where obviously the containment's broken and Wire gets to go free. And the final one is the person who is leading Wire, which is, well, he ends up being named Cable after he joins Wire because, you know, Cable and Wire. And he sort of goes a bit mad and helps let it out as well. So those are the 3 events that means that Wire becomes such a big issue. This is one of them, which means that it gets to stay. It also gets to stay because it leads to the fall of Optifax, because Optifax is the first planet lost to Wire, and it's where Wire is proven to be such a significant threat because about a week or 2 after the events of this, with Wire underground now having escaped, it suddenly emerges after a week or 2, and the entire planet of Optifax in about the space of another week is lost to Wire. Which is of course the first real significant event with Wire that says, this is actually a real thing, and it is a real threat. Finally, it starts Kate as a character. I always wanted this, you know, classic character of like the space pirate who's a bit balls to the wall and a bit crazy, you know the type. But I could never think of how to make the character properly. And then I thought, Kate kind of already fits that description. What if she does her story here, because she's already escaped anyway. So what if she does her story here, and then instead of learning from her lesson, she sort of doubles down and ends up becoming this character that I wanted to have exist in the lore. So, if you remember from episode 2, Kate does get her own story, which I think it's Bombs, Guns and Ash or something. It wasn't a very good name, to be honest, but it had the Ash in the name because that little there is called Ash in Kate's name. So I needed the Ash pun. But she does end up getting a solo story, if you remember from part 2. So Kate does end up becoming a significant character, which is, again, why this story has to exist. Yeah, I think that's it. We've discussed the story, we've discussed the characters, and we've discussed the lasting implications of it on the Säfärsphere. So, thank God we can be done with this episode now. Next episode is going to be a mystery. Oh, I'm so kind. Next episode is going to be an entire mystery. Who knows what's going to happen next episode. But I'm sure it'll be better than this. Thank you for sticking around through my edgy teenage years, personified. And I'll see you next episode. Goodbye.